You really don't understand, do you? Hey, man, don't you realize in order for us to make this thing work, man, we've got to get rid of the pimps and the pushers and the prostitutes and then start all over again clean.
Hey, look, nobody's pushing me anyway, okay? I mean, not you, not the cops, nobody, man. I mean, you want to get rid of the pushers, I'll help you. But don't send your people after me.
Oh, come on, John. Can't you see that we can't get rid of one without getting rid of the other? We got to come down on both of them at the same time in order for this whole thing to work for the people.
With God's name, the merciful benefactor, the merciful redeemer, I want to thank you all for joining me on another episode of Blac-Vocracy, where we try to provide some insightful and useful information in hopes that it will raise your horizon as well as giving you a different perception about day-to-day issues. Today, I want to talk about a particular term because I was inspired by a movie I just saw this past weekend starring Will Smith titled Emancipation. But before I do that, go ahead and hit the subscribe and like and notification button so I can continue to provide content like this in the near future because I need your support, and I hope that you will benefit from the information that I'm about to give and future information as well. So yes, I want to talk about this particular term that is pretty much never used in the public, but it's actually used behind the scene, or at least it's invisible. Let me put it like that. It's used in invisible. We don't see the term or being used often, but you can see in actions this term being implemented. So I want to talk about this term called Dulocracy. Dulocracy, D-U-L-O-C-R-A-C-Y, Dulocracy. This term has its origin in the Greek language and is derived from the word doulos, D-U-L-O-S, and it means servant, to be a servant or a slave, actually. But one of the things that it also provides is a lot of privileges, so much so to where the privileges becomes the rule. See, unlike democracy, where they say it's for the people, by the people, and it's the ruling party within the people, well, this particular term, Dulocracy, just allows you to have privileges, and it's disguised or masqueraded as if you have a lot of rights and say so under the Constitution. But what has really happened is that we as sovereign people, whom God declared that we were sovereign because he gave us dominion over all creation, right? We have allowed individuals to run our day-to-day life and day-to-day operations and have usurped that free will that we have. And I'm often fond of saying, if God gave it, a coward can't save it. So this movie, Emancipation, had me to reflect and to think about how far we've come as African-American people, but yet and still our natural rights that has been endowed upon us by our Creator have been usurped. And so I thought about Dulocracy because that's basically where we are today, with a bunch of privileges. We are a servant, but not to the Most High God. Yeah, I get it. I understand what you're saying. No, I do worship the Creator and so forth and so on. But then ask yourself, what's on your mind day to day? In day-to-day life, day-to-day operations, what's really truly on your mind? Because remember, the thing that operates or control your thoughts more than anything, if it's not the Creator, then it becomes your God. It becomes your what we call Idlah, because you're giving more attention to that than you are the Creator. So this is one of the reasons why I wanted to bring out this word Dulocracy, because I definitely believe that self-help is the best help. Self-help is the best help. And we shouldn't be relegated to a particular status because some piece of paper called the United States Constitution says so. No, God has already given us these natural rights, and it's endowed upon us, and no one can take it away. These are the unenalienable or untransferable rights, unless you give them or voluntarily give these rights away. So I want to make sure that I'm crystal clear. I'm crystal clear about what I'm about to say, because under the 14th Amendment, we was brought through all walks of life after the Civil War and the so-called Emancipation Proclamation. Now, why do I call it so-called? So-called because slavery is not necessarily what we think slavery is, just because you don't have any manacles or fetters on your ankle, around your wrist, or yokes around your neck. That doesn't qualify. If someone can control or influence the way you think, the way you move, the way you exercise yourself, through a reprobated mind type situation, then you are a slave. You are a slave to those concepts. You are a slave to those theologies or ideologies. You are a slave to that. And if you never question to get to the answer of why things happen, then you are a slave to ignorance. So this is one of the reasons why I want to bring out Dulocracy right quick on this particular episode of Blac-Vocracy. Because again, people automatically assume blindly that we're citizens just because they brought us through the District of Columbia. You got to think about what was the state of former slaves once they were so-called emancipated. What status were they given then? I read something years ago about Negro's Paradise, where many slaves were left down in the South and South Carolina, and they began to till the soil, as they say. They began to develop the land during the Reconstruction era, and they were supposed to have been given these 40 acres and a mule, as people like to say, but it was all about trying to rebuild the South after the war. But under Andrew Johnson, who was one of the worst presidents ever, you know, people love to talk about Donald Trump. He had nothing. You know, Donald Trump made Donald Trump, he made Donald Trump look like a Usher boy, Andrew Johnson, because he gave all the property back, restored all the property back to former slave holders. And so he was actually impeached out of office, but also acquitted. But he was a Southern Senate before he became president from Tennessee. So he was disguising or masquerading as a Confederate. He aligned himself with the Confederate flag. But again, I want to talk about Dulocracy because we have a bunch of privileges. That's exactly what's happening, and we're servants to the powers that be, the things that are unseen, so to speak. The Supreme Court case, I know many of you may or may not be familiar with the Supreme Court case of 1896, Plessy versus Ferguson, when it talked about separate but equal. See, this goes without saying that many whites wasn't under the same school of thought as it related to former slaves coming through the District of Columbia under all walks of life. If that was the case, there's no way that the United States Supreme Court would have ruled that Plessy versus Ferguson was equal but fair. So, of course, we know that that case later on was overturned. But I want to just make sure that we're clear, that we have some clarity about Plessy versus Ferguson, because, and I'm going to read right here what I have in front of me about Plessy versus Ferguson, because they talked about in this ruling, it was stated that state laws requiring separate but equal accommodations for Negroes were reasonable. And it was reasonable under police powers. So underline the word police powers. They was policing the situation based on the powers that was endowed upon certain whites to enforce this rule of separate but equal. This is under Plessy versus Ferguson. For those of you who have time, you should research that case law, 1896. But in anyway, in my estimation, I don't think it'll ever get resolved until nature's creator reset the balance in terms of what he bestowed upon us that we just automatically gave away. And I'm fond of saying often that if God gave it, a coward can't save it. So you have to be in a position to want to rebuttal the presumption and ask the proper or appropriate questions when you're dealing with certain people of power. You want to be able to exercise what they call the maxim of law, M-A-X-I-M, the maxims of law, to rebut the presumption of what is assumed when they have relegated you to Dulocracy and have masqueraded and disguised it under democracy. Because again, all we really have is privileges. That's the reason why fundamentally, if you understand the fundamentals of law, many, especially minorities and blacks who go into the court system and come out with a 30-year sentence or a 40-year sentence or even a life sentence in most cases, you come out befuddled, like, how could this have happened? because of my constitutional rights. When you don't understand that what's being played right out in front of you is nothing but a Alice in Wonderland, like chasing the rabbit down the hole. It's invisible. You can't see it. And you think that you have the mental capacity to play the Monopoly game that's been on steroids, but that's not the case. Equality prior to 1954, which was the Brown versus the Board of Education, it was only looked by the United States Constitution to secure the blessings of liberty. I'm going to say that again. That case, that Supreme Court case was only looked at by the United States Constitution to secure the blessings of liberty, not to assert equality for all people. That's the true history behind those cases. And you can go back and read them, like I said before, because it was already written under the Jim Crow. The old Jim Crow system brought into a new form of slavery. That's exactly what Jim Crow did. It brought into a new form of slavery because after the so-called Emancipation, they came out with the black codes and the vagrancy laws and Jim Crow to enforce, using police powers to enforce this ideology of separate but equal. And so as we fast forward to the 14th Amendment, it was not written to do away with racial identity. I'm going to say it again, that the 14th Amendment was not written to do away with racial identity, nor to make a person's impoverished ranking equal to those who was of the aristocratic family. I'll put it like that. It neither was blending black and white. So let's get that understood. It wasn't designed to do that either, to blend black and white. I think the answer to a lot of questions regarding where we sit today, and as we look out and wonder why come the playing field is really not level the way it should be, or why they continue to move the goalposts, I think we truly do ourselves a disservice if we don't pull the wool behind what's really happening. If we continue to just march as if things are the way they are because that's the way it's supposed to be. No, that's not the case. You know, we suffer, as the scripture says, that we suffer for a lack of knowledge. And then behind me, you see that I say that knowledge is the key, because knowledge is the key. Knowledge is the keys to unlocking every door that you think may be closed. All you have to do is answer or ask the proper questions, which we don't do oftentimes. So I do believe that because many Americans today choose to disregard the history of the United States inception, they tend to forget that liberty, as well as the freedom to pursue your own happiness without any interruptions, was always at the forefront of the Declaration of Independence. Always. The only thing that really, I guess you could say, that really separated or really the powers that be had a stronghold on was the Commerce Clause. And of course, that allowed them to assert themselves into state rights, if you will, allow them to come in interstate commerce, as they say. And one of the reasons why a lot of these cases, you'll find that if you commit a crime, let's say with a weapon, with a gun, then the manufacturer of that gun or that bullet that's inside that gun, not only will they charge you with the crime in the state that you reside in, but the manufacturer, let's say if you committed the crime in California, but the gun was made in Texas, not only can you get charged in California, but they'll hit you with interstate commerce because the actual bullets was made in another state. See, this is the monopoly game that they continue to play on a very, very, very steroidic, if that's a term or not, steroid type level. And if you're not aware of what's being played and how it's played in the moving pieces, then you're subservient. You're a subject to an entity of Dulocracy that you've given your mind to. Oh yes, Again, I stated earlier, it doesn't mean because you don't have the yokes and people can't see it, people can't see the handcuffs, the manacles, the fetters around your feet. It doesn't mean that you're not a slave, just that you can't see it because they have you intellectually locked up. So this is one of the reasons why I want to share this particular episode of Dulocracy, because again, the movie itself is such a powerful movie. It takes us back to a time when we was fighting for what we thought was so-called freedom and justice and equality for all. But it was really just a big steroid commerce game that was being played. And I don't think it's been played out. I think that we still, we're still in a relegated position even today. There are things that we're still fighting for, which we shouldn't be fighting for, like equal pay, equal opportunity, reparations, things of this nature. We just got the anti-Emmett Smith lynching bill. You would think out the whatever 120 years or whatever the case may, you would think that that would have been already etched in stone. And I'm talking about before Emmett Till, when all of the soldiers and stuff was seen hanging from a tree in their uniforms. So again, a lot of what's happening, I understand it's through a law of necessity, goods and services under the New Deal, which was in 1933, when we got in the free line and we had our hands out. It wasn't until, I believe, these things that began to happen caused us to slow down in our progress, because we was progressing, and we was progressing very, very strong prior to 1933. Go back and look at the history, what we had produced. And many of us have already heard about Black Wall Street, so I don't have to cover that. But there are many, many other locations, like in Richmond, Virginia. There was a lot of Black Wall Street. You saw what happened down in Rosewood, Florida. So we had a lot of progression, things that was going on. I think right now, in wake of everything that we've seen with the Kanye West or the Kyrie Irvings and many, many more, I think that it is just asinine to continue to see what is going on in our society and think that other people's water is colder than ours. I think that we are in a position to be able to trump every stereotype or misnomer that's been put out there against African-American people. I think now is the time for us to really assert ourselves. Now is the time for us to get out of the free line. Now is the time for us to build our own incorporations, set up our own trust, and also to be able to control our assets. Now is the time. Now is the time. So let's get out of that mindset. Let's get out of the mindset of programs such as food stamps and grants and licenses and, you know, these other privileges they give us about a marriage license or driving permits. You have the right to drive as a traveler. You have the right to marry based on the laws of God. I don't have to get a marriage certificate to support your state treasury. You know, we was just jumping the broom back in the day. So why all of a sudden we have to have a license? Doesn't make sense. You have to ask yourself these questions. So we don't have to stand in the free line any longer. And again, since the southern states had already implemented their black codes and vagrancy law, this was the federal government way of continuing to support state rights and allow them to do what it is they do. And this is the commercial slave system, which is under the penal code of economics. And one of the reasons why you see people continue to go to jail, because if you ever notice, for every law that is written, more and more people go to jail. So we need to start having some pushback and understand really, really what's happening, what's going on. So this has been another brief episode on Blac-Vocracy. I want to thank you all for joining me. I look forward to speaking with you next week. But again, if you like it, please hit that like button for me and subscribe. And the notification, again, the content is for you and myself to be able to become better human beings and provide the excellence that we need to be presenting based on what has been given to us by our Creator. Thank you, and God bless you.